Hello, YouTubers, especially from America, especially differentially other ways, because we are a human species body of individual bodies, names A through Z, having been used as countries, having been used as locations, areas, and states that were forced, checked, or persuaded to blame other things, others, ourselves for what a breaching method caused, and then for them to defend that, and then the people that it hurt, syntactically, therefore physically, to counter that, syntactically, therefore physically. Also, not discerning the breaching method that started the whole thing and maintaining those outcomes to hide itself and behind and through that, because it knew simultaneously the names of the people of the sciences. For example, they would increasingly be incapable of defending their rules, needs, and natures with that, as that. More and more incapable of affording nature's communications and the evolution of it with campuses. And this only allowed rules with that remembered specifically to get to a point where where it could then and now shows them they can afford, for example, even to have with James Madison and what our founders left declassified to be for their communications, to have it discerned, even what nature does. See, we have black pupils, whites of eyes, and have had means since we were kids to discern how, for the same reason, for example, too, even if we didn't know this. Like, I didn't know this when I was a kid, that there was a witch trials place next to Webb House, now renamed the Webb Stevens Museum. Then and now, collusions slash S with organized crime method, with an organized crime method slash S that we have and have had the means to discern as what we all agree about. But people tied to databases, they jump into our conversations dishonestly. Since before computers, since before America's founders were born, the databases of the republic for which we stand in its campus's Marcia system, it became criminally foreign influenced, forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded to from off its location slash S, and from off the location slash S of all the exceptions too that it worked with, valuing how nature shows how it is functional with the parts of itself. For example, the past, the active in time that is not here, the future. These are three identities of relativity to the identity of forever nature that is generating, for example, Earth's special difference in the relativity slash hyperrelativity of it to where and how it is generating too a whole bunch of different individual species bodies. And each one of them is made up of a whole bunch of individual bodies. To have what nature is increasingly demonstrating to us, self-value, everyone roles changing that, even though you don't want to. It may and keeps exceptions, but not ones you discern. And even more in how you guys do it, where they're like, people say, you know, this propagated all, even the truths to use for lies, which has nothing to do with connections to the Truth Network. By the way, I can't get on there, President Trump. They're trying to hide things from you digital. Whiting forensics through administrations has, since I was a little kid, more and more collusions with news networks and with FBI Director Robert Luskin, with a whole bunch of other countries and various natures of federal criminals, including some who were co-defendants of his in a 2006 district court case. Increasingly, they were and are involved with predicate acts with facts. I'm not a lawyer. Lawyers, too, have been roles with this whole predicate acts methods, because that's one of the things our founders did communications in natures shows us, for example, this is about. Where and how, for example, a breaching method reassigned even what black people's whites of eyes communicate by nature, when nature is not only itself as criminal insidiousness nature. It shows us this too. Its identity of relationships to positive and negative, distinctly from all other volumes, but as well, not as one, while not as any other identity of volume, but as all of them anyway. That's what we could discern. What we could discern how it is not our species body of individual bodies that invented. How there are and why there are a whole bunch of different individuals. Even if we invented a species, it's its volume science. There is a distinct identity of simultaneous nature. That is not the other species bodies. Is not them grouped. Is not ours. Is not all the species bodies together. Only humanity is criminally foreign influence, and this is per nature's system too. Nature has been demonstrating to us, and that and how there is a human fact, nature breaching method. That is one of the scientific values, one of the things that are true always. The multi-front impositions formally with the law, and it was locked in with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, relative to why and how there's a witch child's place next to Webb House, even if it was made up. And if we pay attention, I'm not even a lawyer, but if we had proper readings of the Constitution unabridged, we would be asking ourselves, what does everything mean, even if it was and it is made up? And I said that right before there was a reported lawsuit against an Alex Jones. And there are victims advocates, and there are courts families, and there are foreign and domestic intelligence involved with Sandy Hook campuses, including a prison there, who are also roles with organized crimes there and at crime scenes with their forced patients and criminals too, and other countries involved with the doctors, and narratives by culture and reason, and their delusions raw. But they have roles with a principal child abuser and whiting forensics, and with people with the state corrections offices and next to it, increasingly with retired police chiefs from Wethersfield, involved with wire crimes and falsified police reports, putting little kids, fake conversations, and ties to doctors and to police, and then hiding live progressions about that years later. They're doing the same thing with adults, and they're hiding live progressions by faking news articles. And there are intelligence people using such for information, including people policing the internet, including people with the development of policies of Facebook. Facebook has roles recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed with New Britain Superior Court, and with that point, a whole bunch of as people recorded with Collusions/S and confessed before and after the World Trade Center attack. Intercities Collusions/S with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, with his co-defendants, their family members, different neighbors of theirs, and conjunctions to them. Also increasingly inter and intra-cities, with leaders of the kids and their kids abused, specifically for the differences of their guilt roles with that. Also self-valued, or the roles with the abuses of other kids. But roles, no. Also, there's motive screening. And I didn't say anything about Chinese people, Chinese food restaurants along the South State Highway, or any other Chinese food restaurant. Increasingly, people from Wethersfield who have roles with all sides of criminal and civil cases in the interbranch at the same time, putting the same sequence shifts and federal evidence as crimes as organized crimes. And with news, WFSB, Channel 3 News attached me to fake conversations with themselves and with others, with their journalists under the guise of journalism. I'm not a licensed journalist either. I have these roles with whole predicate X methods at the networks and next to them, and exceptions. And if they would just follow mandated law, it would have been solved. So Fox News I put a link to the video. They reported 400,000 deaths from overdoses. That's, those are war numbers. And originally and still, we have the worst than war crimes, breaching that reassigned Black people's rights of eyes. And we still have Collusions/S with the people attacking the formal education. The formal education has collusion, and their difference, the exception, they're all collusion, replacing what our founders communicated and replacing what nature communicates again about the human factory nature breaching method. That is the scientific value that all those sickly distinct, multi-front leveraged laws that were forced were about. But it was also the difference of their guilt or of the overt criminal enterprise is. Private ones, terrorists, originally and still, propagated by a hyper-foreign, timed collusions with criminal and insidious natures of positive and negative treatments, principal treatments, as an array to hide behind and through, where it shows everyone to have self-valued roles, replacing our founders' communications and nature's communications, pretending they can speak on principles anyway. Then they have to hide that by showing the breaching method shows them, well, you better need to pretend you're against tyrants. Change it from a way, don't let people speak about predicate acts and the methods of it recorded. Because the whole methods of predicate acts delivery are recorded relative to what we can discern just because we have black people's whites of eyes. And the slightest bit of truth with the tellings of American history, recorded, as actually recorded, sickly distinctly at Campus A through Z. But also functional for the breaching method, how sickly non-distinctly too. Campuses A through Z have been self-valued roles. Just in America alone, but we have all these countries that are not allowed to speak about how they are actually at next to campuses together, which are database relationships, identities of relativity/relativity T's to ourselves since before computers. Black people's whites of eyes are all about relativity/hyper-relativity, no theory here. This breaching method needs to hide behind and through the difference of the guilt of the people who are, in other words, we're not, when there is the nature of debate itself has stayed criminal and insidious natures of positive and negative treatments, principal treatments, styles, natures of logic that need to say, well, these are experts, and that means what it doesn't. This breaching method employed such, only to be remembered. So there are types of jobs, and everyone's speaking to other people that answer the phones. The agencies and the interbranch and the foreign at the same time, in other words, they change and fake phone transcripts. They change and fake transcripts in databases. They are shown they needed to hide roles with such and with the relative organized crimes and organized crime bodies. Even when criminal enterprises and terrorists, even when they're not in the legal cases, we're all sides of the cases in the interbranch and the intelligence tied to them. And not one of them wasn't criminally foreign influence / hyper-criminally foreign influence. You guys have blamed other things, others ourselves at countries A through Z for things that nature itself shows us to blame on a hyper-foreign breaching that came from before religious messengers were even born. And when you guys have debates and you bring in the value of religion, you guys and people don't even know the beginning of the Old Testament, the beginning of the Quran, come with parts that would have changed the nature of debates. And you guys don't even allow them. You guys use the knowledge of good and evil, for example, to get over on correlation nature and sequence value. And how the subject is supposed to be about what nature is showing us. Generating, for example, how we have black and why we have black people's whites of eyes. And how and why there are totally different species bodies. And they have eyes that are distinct from our own, but they are also non-distinct. And they are simultaneous with our own, but there is also a distinct further relative identity of simultaneous nature, an identity of forever nature, an identity of hyper-simultaneous nature. And man, I was using this word, hyper, since before the invention of hypersonic missiles. See, no one's paying attention because they're having only the experts. This is not just about the expert. You don't have to be an expert about missiles to know that countries A through Z were backed into suits and ties, counters, and exceptions as collusions self-value with those identities and differences and their relativity to readings of statutes and precedents that a breaching method shows them. They have to hide how they were at collusions with the same sequence shift self-value, the same delusion self-value. There are formal delusions all over where they speak about white and black, leaving out the breaching method. Again, nature itself shows us how the laws were a breaching method sickly distinctly against Native Americans, sickly distinctly against the tribes of the Native Americans. And Native Americans founders were born. Already there was slavery for even rules forced north and south. So already there were natures of everyone already heard each other. Already natures of independence and natures of unity, only capable of being defended syntactically and nature-wise as collusion slash S need to hide the same, things that are necessary to be appreciated, other, and how nature shows us to get through the human fact-cheating nature breaching method. We have to be a quality of fact-cheating nature that has free speech. And there's a reason there's a difference between free speech and freedom of expression. And there's a reason that nature uses exceptions and exception nature, unlike anyone else could mimic nature's complete identity. It's complete identity to the extent we could discern. But where we could discern it to an extent, for example, how it's generating such things at the same time. It comes with its complete identity relationship to itself, and the only increasing value of that. Here, or as those three things, as increasingly bound identities of value slash value regression, forced away from here, as a negative identity of relationship relativity slash hyperrelativity to itself, that which is generating totally different individual species bodies, made up of a whole bunch of individual bodies. So we could discern its individual identity of value slash value regression to an extent. And where and how the parts of itself are distinct identities of value progression. Two, they are with demonstration slash S about how it has one identity of relationship to itself, juxtaposed with matter. It has another identity of relationship to itself that won't juxtapose with matter. And it has one portion that is increasingly the mixture of it and the value of it here, where it could be generated, or we are forced away from here to be negative value nature progression, acts in nature as its identity relationship to itself, but and for the evolution of its identity relationship to itself, but also positive onto itself somewhere else. The only reason humanity has been allowed to be self-valued roles, right, where how no one self-values roles, except for how the breaching method employed. All, even to replace James Madison's communications declassified for us in nature's at the same time, and to pretend other self-valued roles being haven't been used remotely that way. There are too many jobs and titles that can't afford to answer a phone and not change and fake what people say, and or self-value roles with intelligence, foreign and domestic, collusions, planting faked and changed phone transcripts and digital evidences, and fake motivations for it too. Increasingly, women interbranch have roles with all kinds of natures of things that they charge men for. They're involved with framing people, and people speak through others dishonestly. They force the principal child abuser while pretending to be against it. And with a West Hartford teacher named with the name O'Neill, and they bring their kids into it. I don't know them at all. Increasingly, these are ones who are involved with Saudi Arabia, with whiting forensics too. and with Connecticut prisons and the corrections offices and people that record. One of the people involved with the child abusers further then and now as a woman. She recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed when she was a girl. A Lance Cuddy is involved with her with that. And with people that are increasingly with the name Kevin Harris has roles with Quinnipiac University with foreign and domestic intelligence and with people planting evidences at and between campuses. I never had a word of conversation with a Kevin Harris. The only time I ever saw him on a campus, I didn't even see my career. He came walking out the door behind me. There are proofs that they try to take that to pretend I know he knows me. Because people who have roles with World Trade Center predicate acts also had those roles motivated to them, motivations for that, per their collusion slash that's with people who've been putting predicate acts and facts with names at and next to each of the campuses I went, who will tell you they were influenced to it. But some ways too, they were influenced themselves, criminally, foreign influence, tactical delusions, wrong, as families too, where they have identity theft, fraud, slander styles, only capable of being manifest, or of those roles with that sensing for the breaching method. This is what's recorded relative to where and to how they make subject treatments and leave out exceptions in exception nature, as nature showing us to appreciate them. They bring up gun crimes. They bring up the separate from the from the like they said 80,000. I don't know. They were unclear. 400,000 people died or 80,000. In other words, anyway, there are triages throughout the country with mental health side involved with all kinds of drugs and medicines, crimes, collusions, hyper additionally from their roles with organized crimes, acts, and methods, and with relative delusions too, recorded. But relative to the roles of the wire crime acts and methods, falsified transcripts, and their roles personally and professionally, with a bunch of judges involved with their extended family members too, with predicate acts, methods, all kinds of identity theft, fraud, slanders instances, and uses of conjunctions to roots and conjunctions to that, like all along Route 3, and conjunctions to that and to that, like the state judicial branch offices, and where and how the state corrections offices. So I never had a word of conversation, never saw him on the inside of a campus in my life. A Lance Cuddy. There are people involved with child abusers, leaders of kids, years apart, first force. At recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. He also has roles with foreign and domestic intelligence, with Alina's Pizza on Park Street, and with people further involved with intercities and intra-cities and inter-campuses and intra-campuses involved with identity theft, fraud, slander. These are also some black KKK theme, Confederate flag theme, Latino theme, right on the Facebook page of a principal child abuser involved with some untimely deaths, people involved with an untimely death at Trinity College, even if it was made up, tied to another one who brought up them intercities, the same ones brought up the same brought up a whole bunch of different things at the same time, intercities, and on out the campuses and with the intelligence next to them. They don't know how it's connected. It's people involved with already with planting all sides of criminal and civil cases, depositions, their lawyers, the interbranch news at the same time, putting the same sequence shifts, including in the World Trade Center attack context, with the court itself and names on all sides of that case. In New York City, next to the World Trade Center, the morning before the World Trade Center attack. They have collusion slash S with people named Scalora too the night before that, and long term before it. And their roles with people named DeMoro and others involved with Phil Collo, involved also with some Mendez police, with falsified police reports, with sexual and medical offenders of kids. A bunch of people in the Brit Spirit Court with FBI Director Robert Luskin before and after the World Trade Center attack, intercities with them, also with retired police chiefs from Wethersfield and their families and intimate ties, like a police chief Cintron has roles with organized crime acts, identity thefts and frauds, federal evidences crimes, with people on Elm Street and Rocky Hill and in Weathersfield, involved also with their educators, repeating fake things about students while others put fake predicate acts in databases. In other words, and then they're shown needs to hide that. And it was time their rules motivated to time collusions even against themselves with the World Trade Center attack, and their rules with a detective Samuda with Central Connecticut State University, involved with wire crime acts and methods, with a bunch of people with the business department in and Central Connecticut State University, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. A whole bunch of people along Two Route Highway and Hangdog Lane in conjunctions to it and to that have roles with intelligence families at and next to the campuses, intercities, like colleges and universities, and fire campuses and medical campuses, and a bunch of their family members have roles with these streets and their conjunctions, also with body dumping spots and names with the state judicial branch offices and corrections offices, increasingly who have collusions with predicate acts with facts methods, and the method of that generates them, besides nature generating demonstrations of it. But the method also keeps nature's demonstrations blamed on other things, others, or selves. Exactly the way the breaching method needs. The human fact shaping nature breaching method has more so roles with why and how everyone has self-valued roles with logic, nature's logic, principles, treatments that self-value, even the whole ocean with pollution going into it increasingly. Everyone's self-valued roles with how a breaching method that even had slavery roles, so having been sustained, and then America's founders were born. And they didn't have free speech, and everyone had to pretend other to an extent, otherwise be sentenced. Otherwise, keep their mouth shut and hurt by the breaching method other ways. Not just by nature itself, because nature itself is trying to show us there is one way to fight where everyone wins, even those who lose. Otherwise, we sense because we are shown it's not that nature positive that is everywhere at once and that builds upon itself. It's where evolution's fruits and gifts and means out of nowhere come from. But it's for a system that shows us to check to make sure we're not making criminal insidiousness natures of positives out of negatives. There's a difference between making that nature of so nature shows us there's a difference between criminal insidiousness natures of positives, like criminal insidiousness natures of peace, and of therefore hyper peace, a nature of peace that is capable of defending its definition and affording such discernment and the quality of fact shaping nature necessary to defend for and how and why. To defend how and why, for example, we have rights that are too numerous to have to list them. A breaching method does things like with the Facebook pages. Facebook has rules saying, "Well, that's not our job. We're just repeating what the other agencies say," and then they're confessing to things. They know that New Britain Superior Court has rape threats with people with a proven principal child abuser. That also the with Facebook pages of Weathersfield Police and of New Britain Superior Court. They have collusions also with the Facebook pages of the campuses, also with police forms forging and switching names. There's a police form who used his own. One of them used the name Darth Vader at Trinity College, who's involved with an untimely death at Trinity College, with people on my street from other areas who made confessions on my street for the roles with that, and brought up the principal child abuser's campus to me with that. A whole bunch of people tied to a Scalora family have roles with Zion Street in Hartford next to Trinity College, and people next to Central Connecticut State University in New Britain, Connecticut, involved with the FBI Director Robert Lusk in various natures of courts, in foreign countries with sexual medical offenders of kids. Hid their roles with identity theft. I never had a class, never saw him on a campus in my life. They had one tried to make one fake exception, and he yelled out my name from in Glastonbury. He has roles within Glastonbury intelligence families, a bunch of Glastonbury intelligence families from Central Connecticut with ties to Central Connecticut State University. Also have syntax and roles and natures that were used before the World Trade Center attack, as collusion/S recorded on and off the Connecticut had roles with it also with the campuses through time, through other natures of organized crime roles they have with the World Trade Center and the interbranch, including the court next to the World Trade Center. This is also forgiveness because they're only capable of being organized crime acts and methods, and speaking about crimes anyway. A breaching method employed the names of the people of the sciences, criminally foreign influence, tactical delusions raw. Our founders' communications and nature itself demonstrates that we're supposed to understand this. Anyone who would admit it, though, would be censored. And how and why people would be motivated to do that is because it was only allowed. It made all identities of integrity. They can't defend they have to change and fake what people say. Then they have to pretend to be against it. So they're offensively making allegations and trying to pretend that people are discrediting them, are denying with them for, they can't afford to have what's discerned. They have roles with the very things they pretend to be against. So someone respond for the fake conversations that Channel 3 News attached me to. These are also the sources of WTNH. Also at corners of streets and next to crime scenes. They've been planting evidences through time. They have a bunch of probate court judges tied to the same house involved with sexual and medical crimes with kids, and with Hartford Hospital with a bunch of names, and their roles with a bunch of people at UConn involved with Hartford Hospital with the same names too, tactical delusions raw. These are people with all kinds of medicines crimes, with pretending to be against drugs and medicines crimes. They're putting fake things in databases no one's looking into. They personally and professionally have a whole bunch of judges, family members, involved with a whole bunch of predicate acts with facts, methods, and means to discern that where and how originally and still all natures of investigators in their campuses, how they are used remotely, criminally foreign influence / hyper criminally foreign influence, and tactically delusions raw. Forgiveness is because they're the only ones that tried to do the job. And forgiveness is also because when we try to show that they have collusions with the overt criminal enterprise, they have run into high life aggression. They've been using differences of their own and other people so long. The breaching method shows them they have to hide that by using phenomena like where they have mental health evaluations for us. They're putting fake transcripts and covering up collusions with their families, with rackets with the fake transcripts and databases. They have collusions with all natures of crime scenes from there too. This is not just straight criminal incompetence alone. Where and how black pupils' rights of eyes has stayed, apart from what is inseparable from when we are being led by science proper. Not science just because it's an expert. In other words, you guys are using the knowledge of good and evil about American history and delusions raw, replacing this most principal thing about why and how James Madison had to get even everyone counter-extorted, forced to become a country. And everyone had to stay roles, northern colonies, southern colonies, and then states. There's still northern states and southern states. They had to stay roles even with slavery. Otherwise, they would have been censored by overt criminal enterprises, private ones, different countries, locations, areas, and states. The differences of guilt. This breaching method employed differences and roles with systems tactical ulterior than one that is generating all group differences of the other species' bodies and of our own. And or it's generating demonstrations to us with finite individual, grouped, active, and progressive and/or simultaneous demonstrations, negative value nature progressions, acts of nature, and demonstrations that we are and have been using systems tactical ulterior from its own. And I say it that way because it's showing us that way there's a breaching method involved too, as another distinct identity of hyper invisible but still discernible. So we're going to learn to appreciate the parts of speech being about the invisible but still discernible slash hyper invisible but still discernible. Black people, please. Someone be have courage. Too, when you see it, you guys are going to be able to discern. Little rap guy and friends are going to help you guys see it too. In other words, overt criminal enterprises and private ones have organized crime acts and methods uncharged. No one realizes about them and motivations tied to that. These are people personally and professionally involved with a whole bunch of other countries' names, but also a hyper singular breaching method where all sides of criminal and civil cases, their lawyers, their sources, their family members, other natures of conjunctions to themselves, their campuses, their sources. The same thing with the interbranch and the intelligence in the news and the difference of the guilt of the networks, the intelligence that the networks are not next to it. They're also increasingly confessing, demonstrating, recording, and confirm roles with that. A whole bunch of people with the FBI director Robert Luskin and Thaddeus Kowalski have collusions slash S with people on 2-hour highway and hangdog lane conjunctions to it, like a Brian Boning has roles of organized crimes with them along Route 3 too, and which is conjunctive to Hangdog Lane where it runs into 2-hour highway. And his neighbors with some body dumping spots. He didn't say that. He just said he has roles. He confirmed roles with federal evidence of wire crimes with people that have federal evidence of crimes and identity theft, fraud, slanders, all kinds of natures of criminally foreign influence uses of Weathersfield police and people tied to him too with that. His neighbors, a Maria Pizzino and a Steven Stocco. I never had a word with a conversation with a Steven Stocco. He was put into a math class with me when I was a senior, and a Ray Colo and Paul Zana were in that class. And I never contributed. They constantly harassed him. But it was like I observed there are proofs that they were influenced to harass him because they were trying to get me to. If I said took part with that with one thing, they would pretend that I was a bully and all those things like that. So I never had a word of conversation with Steven Stocco because he never even looked at me. He said I didn't sit near. I sat behind him and like not close to him. So in other words, plus they hid with Paul Zano. They tried to make that exception to make it look like I know him. I never had class with him. I had nothing to do with him in grammar school too. People increasingly from my grammar school have a Paul Zano involved with mayors from Weathersfield and from other cities and people from other countries involved also with different natures of conjunctions to him that record, confess, demonstrate, confirm him involved those two intercampuses, intercities, with people and interstates, with people also criminally foreign influence, tactical delusions raw, involved with the part where we could observe. The part slash us where we could observe investigations, investigators of all ages and natures, how they were and are used remotely, criminally foreign influence, tactical delusions raw. And there are connections between people who keep trying to make, problems between me and people involved with the different businesses. And like that, in other words. And these are also people increasingly tied to the kids of and the families of leaders of kids involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders instances. These are styles of that relative to the black people's whites of eyes, no. But it's also relative to roles with the breaching method. And then, in other words, so please, they would be great people and better educators rather than collusion slash S. Because there are a bunch of untimely deaths connected and murders that were brought up at the same time, including body dumping spots years apart and different reported killers. who also have roles with time collusion slash S with corners of streets manifest where how we can observe investigators being having been used remotely, criminally foreign influence, tax illusions, raw. And networks also involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders. Fourth, there's only three branches of government, and there are only two of them. They're individually grouped and together, kept criminally foreign influence styles, pretending other needs, natures. At the same time, with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and a whole bunch of countries too. Everyone's shocked and all, like where they have treatments of what people say on social media. They can't afford the quality of fact should nature. We could use social media to bring, to force, to reveal. That's what we were supposed to do. So they make all kinds of exception nature. Facebook also has other roles with a whole bunch of different countries, even people from the UN involved with them with ad placements and their roles all along roads and routes and with the campuses and the differences of guilt of their predicate acts, their roles are next to them. And with the courts, New Britain Superior Court, Harper Courts, they have roles with a whole bunch of other countries and people from interstates involved at and next to the campuses through time. Intercities with ones involved also planting evidences at and next to the kids' houses with people that didn't have classes together and relative to where they are recorded themselves making fake exceptions to cover up later. This breaching method employs names on all sides of criminal and civil cases, and the interbranch and the news all self-body roles, tortured, tricked, or persuaded, self-body roles with the same sequenceship, relative delusions, principal treatments in place of the answers that are a perfect slash hyper perfect, like what were all those crazy laws about against Native Americans, against women's rights, against they're about a human fact treatment nature breaching method. That's one thing they all were valued as equally, or at the same time, rather. Vaccines prepare each mind who disbelieves. Let's focus on the World Trade Center predicate acts I spoke about. Don't see they influence people to go fishing with them and changing and collude to be collusions with them. You guys are preventing me short words. Whole bunch of fake conversations with me, with themselves, and with others. The news and the interbranch pretended at the same time, including with federal agencies in a whole bunch of different countries and foreign and domestic military, and ones that makes it look like I know them if I start talking about it. So get them on paper because it's them that are refusing to identify themselves legitimately into branch because they get people those locations and people aren't allowed to record things. They're putting fake things in databases as collusion slash S with all natures of crime scenes and with all natures of exceptions. Even collusions at next to body dumping spots with the names next to it. And know how news people are always next to crime scenes. Please follow mandated law for any of them. Or as you guys, Connecticut News, you guys have obligations by the law. Get me off the fake conversations with WFSB and the fake ties to them and the sources of WTNH and the rules with all along Ridge Road and conjunctions to it, like all along Route 175 and conjunctions to it, like Ridge Road, are people who have been stacking predicate acts with facts, faked in sequence shifts, fake motivations for it, identity theft, fraud, slanders, inclusions from other campuses with people at campuses, and the differences of the guilt of the adults or kids, or if the adults are worked there, all those differences. The breaching knew that people would have to hide that in the future, as they're actively incapable of having one proper outcome in any case that comes before them. Formally, all sides, the lawyers are sick. All kinds of organized crime methods recorded involved with the intelligence tied to a Trantola and the courts associated with them. They demonstrated it was too true to me. I can't get them on paper, one name in sequence. They have criminally foreign influence uses of words like conspiracy theory. I barely have words with them at all. No. I caught them for roles with people forcing child abusers, leaders, and kids. They won't follow mandated law legitimately. Get them on paper with the interbranch and then me off the fake conversations with the news and their sources. Get someone who disbelieves. Get them on paper formally who disbelieves. Get them on paper now.